All right, let's take a look at where we left off last time. And we have a player here. If we press play, our character moves, walks around. Pretty cool. We also created this thing called the scriptable object, which is like a data container. And we took a look at like when we press a key, we could actually like, I'm using E here, but when I press E, you can see the health goes all the way down. And we're going to use that to detract from the player health. And we're using this scriptable object here, and reset that back to 10, as a way of like controlling the stats for our player. So what we'd like to do is when that health goes down to 0, I'd like to switch it to a different animation. Right now we have all these walk animations. Let's create a new clip here. And let's see, inside the art folder, player character, player animations, I'm just going to make an animation called player underscore NO, or KO rather, for knocked out. And so this is kind of like attributed to, like, say you have a death animation in your game. For me, my character just respawns. So this is just our character knocked out. And I added this to the project file. I just kind of redrew this character, erased half of his body, extended his hands, and made his eyes like this. So what I can do is we're going to go in here and we'll create a new clip, and we're going to name it player knocked out. And then I'm just going to grab this and just drop it in there. Now when I press play, if we're on the player knocked out animation, I think we have to save it. We could just switch. And actually, I think this, it is a sprite. Oh, actually, we don't want to press play up here. We just want to press it in here. And you can see now it switched to that knocked out animation. All right, let's stop this. And just kind of click on idle and then back to knockout here. All right, now let's go to our animator component here. And let's go ahead and grab that knocked out animation. And it looks like it automatically added it for us, which is nice. Otherwise, you could just go into your, if it didn't do that for you, art player animations folder, and then just drag it in there. All right, so what we're going to do is you have this option here, which is any state. So remember, a state is like walking, moving, sleeping, whatever the animation is. What we want to do is we have a bunch of states here, walking, right? We have idle and stuff. What we want to do is go from any state directly to player knockout when our health equals 0. So let's go ahead and add a trigger. And when this trigger is checked on, and we'll just call this KO for knocked out. When this is triggered on, we're going to jump to and play the player knocked out animation, which is a single frame. So to get it to transition is, you see this line here, which transitions from entry to blend tree. If I right click on any state, I make transition, I click on this. You can see we have this player knocked out state. If I select this transition line and I move this down, you'll see there's a condition here. If I check that, you can see that it brought our move X, move Y, and we also have this knockout here. And so that's the condition to go from any state to player knockout. Now, something else we want to do is you want to make sure that has exit time is not checked on. What that means is if we turn that on, it's going to fully play this entire clip here, which is kind of like our idle state, until it gets to this state. And we don't really have an entry state because it's any state. Another thing we want to do is change our settings. Notice that there's this big blend here between the two states. I want this transition to happen immediately, so I'm going to uncheck fixed duration, and I'm going to make the transition duration 0. So that way it happens, like that knocked out state happens immediately. In game development, or game production 1, we go into much more detail with 3D characters and how this is used with 3D characters. But for now, yeah, that's just understand that if you uncheck has exit time and you change the fixed durations, our character will immediately snap to that animation. There'll be no blend time. All right, so we have a script now that handles player health, movement, and all this good stuff, right? What I want to do is I want to create another script, and I'm just going to create the C# script. I'm going to call it player animations. And this is going to control any additional animations that happen. So let's select our player, and let's drop this script on top of there. Like that. All right, so let's do some refactoring. Now, just to kind of explain how you like good sort of a good programming practice or good way of doing things to keep you motivated as you code. A lot of times you'll write something, see it moving. Like we have our player movement script here, and we could see that it got our player moving, and we're really excited about it. And then you do something called refactoring, and part of that is this. There's a kind of a programming paradigm called signal responsibility theory, and within that, it's like you want to break your classes out into individual components. So player movement is only going to handle the movement. And then we have this other script here called player animation. So let's delete all of this inside here. Now inside of player animations, this is going to handle everything that has to do with our animations. So that like if you're working with another programmer, another artist or game designer, or whatever, they can just go right inside of player animations. They can edit the animation script, and then they could just focus on movement here. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab this line here, and I'm going to hit Control X on it. And then I'm going to paste that inside of here. And then what I want to do next is, and so again, this is going to handle just our planar animations, which deals with our animator. I'm going to go ahead and grab this awake function here, copy it. I'm going to delete this animator from here. I'm going to paste this awake function inside of here, and I'm going to delete these two out here. I'm just hitting Control L in front of those to get it. Now we still have some other errors down here. But what I want to do is I want to create a movement, like two methods. And what we're going to do inside of those methods is we're going to move the character, and then we're also going to essentially play the animation. So we're going to call that from this moving function. So what we're going to need for that is we're going to need a reference to the this player animation script. So go ahead and remember how you create a reference to a script. Well, we give it an access modifier, private, public, or whatever, the name of the script. And then because we know this is, to make it easier, we're going to name underscore player animations, and then we're going to hit a semicolon there to close that up. Now remember, the player animation script is another component that's on here. So if the next thing that came to mind is like, oh, Dr. Demarjan is just going to get that component, then you'd be absolutely right. So I'm just going to duplicate this rigid body line, paste this in here, and I'm going to grab this player animations and just paste that in here. Now we have access to this player animation script, and we grab that component, and it's being stored inside of this variable here. So we still have errors because we have all of these things that we're referencing the animator here, right? And we also have some other things going on, like we're passing in the value of move direction. So let's take care of that stuff now. All right, so let's go back to our player animation here. And remember, we want to be able to essentially transition from any state to our knocked out animation. So let's make a method. So public void KO animation. And inside of this, we're going to do underscore animator dot set trigger. And this is a lot easier than the other ones. And then we're just going to type in KO. So when we call this method KO animation here, it's going to reference this KO object here. But we actually have to create the reference to this animation as well. So let's actually just put this in quotes for now so that it knows that we're referencing this KO here. So let's save that. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so we can see that a little better in our code. All right, so if we go back to our movement, remember in our inside of this script, we are setting, let's see. Essentially, yeah, here we go. We're setting, see how we're using the word set float move X to the direction of our move X here? These are values. Remember, they're being put in through our WASD keys. What I want to do is I'm going to create another method inside of player animation just called set moving animation. So let's go ahead and do that. So public void set moving animation. And let's go ahead and, oops, hit enter on there. And then inside of here, I'm going to pass in a true or false value. And this is just going to set our animations to whether they're true or they're false. And if you see here, oh, actually, you know what? We're setting a float. And remember that float value is based on a vector 2, which is x and y here. Remember, we have like the two values that we're passing in. So we don't want a bool here. We want a vector 2 here. And we want to just call this, I'm just going to do shorthand for direction, just call that dir for direction. And we're going to use this variable to actually set the value inside. Instead of using these, we're going to call this player animations method, and we're going to set the value for move x and move y. We're going to let that get passed in. So let's go ahead and copy both of these. I'm going to hit Control X here, and I'm going to paste them inside of here. Now these are not going to be move.x. We're going to be using this direction variable here. So let's copy that, paste it here, and paste it here. Now what we can do is we can just, let's save this. And we've cleaned up our code pretty good. We've got a lot of that stuff out of here. And now we just have this that controls the movement, and this is going to control the animations being played. Remember, the animations are being played by this move x and y. So inside of here, remember we have this player animations variable, and it's not being used. It's grayed out. We can actually go back in here, and we can use this to move our player around. And actually what we're going to do is inside of move direction here, I'm going to go ahead and do player animations dot set moving animation. And all I'm going to do is just pass in this move direction here. And what happens is, remember, this is storing our player movement, right? Based on our WASD keys. So by passing that in there, we've essentially taken the two lines out of code here and we've added them here. And so as we're moving our or pressing our WASD keys here, it passes whatever key we pressed into this direction here, and then it gets passed into direction X or Y. So this method here is now controlling all of our movement. So I'm going to save both of these, and let's press play here. You can see now it still works. Now, I haven't done anything yet where, let me select my scriptable object, where if it equals 0, I'm pressing E here, that it plays the death animation. So let's take a look at that next. Now remember, player health is being used to control our death animations, right? So inside of here, let's go ahead and grab I guess we can just go to player movement here and just copy this whole line here. So we're going to grab player animations, because remember, inside of player animations, we have our KO, or essentially, which is like equivalent, like if your character dies. But for us, our character is just going to get knocked out. It's a kid's game. And so we have a reference there. And now what we can do is use that to access this knocked out animation to get it to play. But remember, there's a couple other things we need to do too to think about is, even if our character is knocked out, we need to stop the player from moving, right? Like, see how I'm pushing the WASD keys? Our character is still going to be able to move around if he's knocked out. So we have to factor that in as well. But let's just focus right now on setting up this. All right, we also need to grab we'll add an awake function inside of player health. And we'll delete these two out, because we need to get that component. Remember, we have player health, we have player movement, and let's go ahead and move this up too, because I like to have all of my scripts together. So we have player movement, player health, and player animations here. And we need to grab that component for player animations. And if you remember before, we had this take damage here. And then we have this method called player restart. And player restart happens if our character's health is less than or equal to 0. Well, now what we can do is grab player animations here and then hit dot, and you can see it gives us everything that we had before. And you could see we have this KO animation method. So let's press play really quick and see if that works. Let's make sure we select our player stats. Here we go. Boom. There's our character knocked out. But you can see here when I push my WASD key, I have this knocked out character that can float around, which we don't want. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to create a script, and it's just going to be called player. And this is going to store a reference to all of our the attributes like experiences, players, anything that has to do with the player. It's going to store references to it. So let's go ahead and grab this. And for one thing I want to use this to access that scriptable object, this guy right here. So I know inside of player health at the top, we have a reference that we already created to this player stats SO script. So I'm going to go ahead and grab all of this, and I'm just going to paste that in the top of this player folder. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S to save that. All right, and let's also add this to our player, this player script. Let's see if I can just drag this up top here. There we go. Okay. Now, what I want to do is see the stats scriptable object. I want to be able to get inside of player movement here. I want to get a reference also to player. This will make sense in a second. I'll re-explain all of this. So let's go ahead and make another reference. And remember, whenever I say reference, because this is private here, is I'm going to make a reference to the player, because we're going to pretty much store this or make this acceptable really just towards the player, so we don't have to keep pasting scriptable object and everything. So inside of here, let's make a private variable of type player and just call this underscore player. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete or duplicate, not delete, one of these lines and just do the same thing. So this is player. And then we're getting a reference to our player component. Let's go ahead and save that. Now, here's the thing with access modifiers, right? Because this is private inside of here, I can't access this outside of this script. So, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So here we are, we have a reference, right? We created this underscore player, and then we got this component. But if I do underscore player here and I hit dot, I can't find stats, right? It doesn't show up. If I made this public, which I don't want to do either, because I'd like this to be only accessed by things that I'd like the stats thing to only be accessed by specific, like I want it to be explicit when I access this stats scriptable object. I don't want it to be public and accessed by everything. But just to show you, if I type in public here and I do the name of my script, which is like underscore player, and then I do dot underscore, or like you could even see it just popped up as the first thing, stats. But so how do you access something if it's private from another script? Well, so let's go ahead and save this. We need to create sort of this, we have to create these things called accessors. And the way you do that is you create a property of the same type. So I'm going to do public, and then player stats scriptable object. And so what we do is, because it's public, I'm going to make it capital, so stats. And then we're going to make this equal to, we're going to use a lambda expression for this, to this underscore stats SO. So we're not accessing this one directly, and we have to be explicit when we reference this exact stats one. And by doing this, we're saying, hey, this is directly connected to this one right here. Okay, so remember, this also gives us access now to everything that's in this scriptable object, which is, let's set health to 10. So what I can do here is inside of player movement, as remember, we have this move input here. Where's our rigid body here? So what I want to do is, remember, this rigid body is what's moving our player around. We have physics attached to it, and what we do is we move the position based on you know, whatever the current position is, like this is the current position, 0, 0, 0, let's say, plus move direction, which is connected to our WASD keys. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm just going to say if underscore player dot stats, and that gives us access to this stats here, which really is just storing a reference to that scriptable object. And what we want to do is check if that health is equal to 0. We're going to return, or we're going to jump out of this method. We're going to end this method, so we can't use our WASD keys anymore. Now the property that we're accessing is dot health, and we're going to say here is less than or equal to 0. And actually, I think we could just, we don't even need these curly braces. There's a shorthand way of doing it where we could just type return and then semicolon. And that'll kick us right out of this method. It'll jump after, it'll return out of this move player method. So let's try that. So I'm going to press E. I go down to 0, and now I can't move. I'm pressing WASD, and you can see it's just looping on this idle here. And regardless of my presses here, it's not doing anything. And just to be clear, we really should comment this stuff. I'll probably go back and comment all this code and just make it available to you guys even after the class. But what happens is, if player stats is equal to 0, it returns out of this method, which means it jumps from here to this onEnable function here. So it goes to the next method in the sequence. But we still have this other stuff working, like fixed update checking, and that's why the WASD keys are showing data, like they're showing numbers and stuff as I'm pushing them, the WASD keys. All right, let's always remember to set your player health back to 10, and let's save everything. And that's it for this tutorial.